After months of service overseas, Captain Elias Grayson finally earns a first-class seat. But a flight attendant's prejudice sparks a chain of events that turns a routine flight into a deadly battle for survival at 30,000 feet. The cabin of the Boeing 787 hummed, a blend of jet engines and hushed anticipation. The air carried the faint scent of disinfectant and the lingering aroma of coffee from the previous flight. Captain Elias Grayson, weary from months spent in the arid landscapes of Djibouti, exhaled slowly as he settled into his first-class seat, 2A. It was more than just a seat. It was a sanctuary, a reward for his service. The plush leather molded to his tired frame, a stark contrast to the hard cots and unforgiving terrain he had grown accustomed to. He closed his eyes, savoring the quiet moment before the inevitable chaos of takeoff. Elias was a black man, built solid and strong, with a quiet intensity that commanded respect. His uniform, impeccably pressed, bore the weight of his rank and the silent stories of his deployments. He had earned this upgrade, a small token of appreciation from an airline, eager to show its support for the troops. He looked forward to the long flight back to his family in Sacramento, California. He imagined his children's faces, their joyous screams as he walked through the door. He pictured his wife, Lena, her warm embrace a balm for his weary soul. These thoughts were his compass, guiding him through the toughest of times. He reached into his carry-on and pulled out a worn copy of The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois, a comforting companion on his travels. The book was a reminder of his heritage, his history, and the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. The boarding process continued around him, a symphony of shuffling feet, overhead bins slamming shut, and the murmur of conversations. Elias remained in his cocoon of tranquility, his senses attuned to the subtle changes in the aircraft. He knew the drill. He had flown countless times before, but this flight felt different, charged with a sense of anticipation that he couldn't quite explain. Just as he was about to open his book, a voice shattered his peace. "Excuse me, sir." Elias opened his eyes. Standing before him was a woman in her late 30s, her face contorted in a tight, unpleasant expression. Her name tag identified her as Diane Rathmore, a flight attendant for American Airlines. She held a tablet in one hand and an air of disdain in the other. "There must be some mistake," Diane said, her tone condescending. "This seat isn't for you." Her eyes flicked over Elias, lingering on his uniform as if it were a costume. "There seems to be a problem with your boarding pass." She snatched the pass from his hand before he could respond, her fingers brushing against his with a cold indifference. Elias felt a flicker of annoyance. "I assure you there is no mistake. This is my assigned seat." He kept his voice calm, his years of military training helping him maintain composure. Diane examined the boarding pass, her lips pursed. "Well, it says here. But that can't be right. Captain Grayson? In first class?" She scoffed, as if the very notion were absurd. She gestured dismissively toward the back of the plane. "You'll need to move." Now, her words hung in the air, laced with prejudice and disrespect. Passengers nearby began to stir, their conversations dying down as they tuned into the unfolding drama. A few glanced at Elias with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. The air in the cabin thickened, charged with an unspoken tension. Elias's jaw tightened. He was used to this kind of treatment, the subtle jabs and veiled insults that came with being a black man in a predominantly white space. But he wasn't going to back down. He had earned this seat, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. But this was more than just a seating dispute. It was a clash of ideologies. Wondering what's next, Elias met Diane's gaze, his eyes conveying a quiet determination. "I'm afraid I must insist," he stated calmly. "This is my assigned seat, and I have no intention of moving." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "If there's a problem, perhaps you should consult with your supervisor." Diane's face flushed with indignation. "I am perfectly capable of handling this myself," she retorted, her voice rising slightly. "I'm simply trying to rectify a mistake." She glanced around, seeking support from the other passengers. But most avoided eye contact, their discomfort palpable. Then a voice cut through the tense atmosphere. Both Elias and Diane turned towards the source of the sound. A man had risen from his seat in 3A, his broad frame filling the aisle. He was older, with close-cropped grey hair and a weathered face that spoke of a life lived outdoors. He wore a simple polo shirt, but Elias immediately recognized the aura of military discipline that emanated from him. "That's Captain Grayson," the man stated, his voice a low growl that commanded attention. "And unless you plan on explaining to your airline why you just disrespected a soldier who outranks half this plane, I suggest you step back." Diane's eyes widened, her composure faltering. She stammered, I didn't realize. Well, now you do, the man said, his gaze unwavering. Apologize to the captain and let him be. He stood his ground, a silent sentinel defending Elias' right to be there. Elias felt a surge of gratitude towards the stranger. He hadn't expected anyone to intervene on his behalf. He offered the man a curt nod of acknowledgement. Diane's face was now a mask of frustration and embarrassment. She glanced around, desperately searching for a way out of the situation. I need to get my supervisor, she mumbled, her voice barely audible. With a final resentful glare at Elias, she turned and hurried towards the galley, her heels clicking sharply on the cabin floor. The tension in the air eased slightly as Diane disappeared. The man from 3A settled back into his seat with a grunt. Don't let it get to you, Captain, he said, offering a slight smile. Some people just can't stand to see a black man in first class. Elias managed a wry smile in return. Thank you, Sergeant Major, he replied, noting the man's rank from the subtle insignia on his shirt. I appreciate that. He knew the Sergeant Major was right. This wasn't just about a seating assignment. IT was about prejudice, about the ingrained biases that still permeated society. A few minutes later, a portly man with a sweating brow appeared at Elias' side. Captain Grayson, he asked, his voice oozing with false sincerity. I'm so sorry about the confusion. Diane is new and still learning the ropes. Please accept our sincerest apologies. He offered Elias a voucher for a free flight, a clumsy attempt to smooth over the situation. Elias accepted the voucher with a polite nod. Thank you. He knew the apology was hollow, a mere formality to avoid a potential lawsuit. But he wasn't interested in making a scene. He just wanted to get home. The supervisor turned to leave, then paused. Again, Captain. We are truly sorry for the inconvenience. He cast a nervous glance towards the back of the plane before hurrying away. Elias sighed and opened his book. But the words blurred before his eyes. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Diane's initial reaction had been too strong, too personal. It was as if she had been expecting him, as if she had a specific agenda. He pushed the thought aside, attributing it to his own weariness and paranoia. But the uneasy feeling lingered. What other secrets were hiding on this flight? Curious. As the plane soared over the heartland of America, somewhere above Oklahoma City, Elias attempted to find some semblance of peace. He slid on his noise-canceling headphones and queued up a smooth jazz playlist. The saxophone melodies washed over him, slowly unwinding the knots in his shoulders. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and focused on the rhythm, trying to shut out the lingering tension from the earlier confrontation. He drifted into a light doze, the drone of the engines a monotonous lullaby. Images of his family flickered through his mind, comforting visions of laughter and love. He saw his son, Mateo, practicing basketball in the driveway, his daughter, Sophia, engrossed in a book, and Lena tending to her beloved garden. These were the moments he lived for, the reasons he endured the hardships of his deployments. His respite was short-lived. A sudden jolt rocked the aircraft, throwing him forward against his seatbelt. The music in his headphones cut out abruptly, replaced by the startled gasps of his fellow passengers. He opened his eyes, his senses immediately on high alert. The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Overhead bins popped open with loud cracks, sending bags and personal belongings tumbling into the aisle. A laptop crashed to the floor, its screen shattering on impact. Passengers screamed, their voices laced with fear. Elias gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. He glanced over at Sergeant Major Huxtable, who looked grim. The retired Marine's eyes were narrowed, his gaze fixed on the wing outside the window. What the hell is going on? A woman shrieked from across the aisle, her voice bordering on hysteria. Just then, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, his tone strained. Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced some unexpected turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain calm. The flight crew is monitoring the situation, but the turbulence didn't subside. Instead, it intensified, growing more erratic and violent with each passing second. The plane bucked and shuddered as if caught in the grip of a giant unseen hand. Passengers were thrown against their seats, their bodies flailing helplessly. The lights flickered ominously, casting long dancing shadows across the cabin. A collective gasp swept through the plane as the lights died completely, plunging everyone into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on moments later, casting an eerie green glow that did little to alleviate the fear. Screams filled the cabin, a cacophony of terror that pierced through Elias' calm demeanor. He felt a surge of adrenaline, his instincts kicking into high gear. He knew this was more than just turbulence. Something was terribly wrong. He reached for the call button, intending to summon a flight attendant. But before he could press it, a section of the ceiling panel above him ripped open, revealing a tangle of wires and insulation. A small object fell from the opening, landing in his lap. He picked it up, his fingers closing around a small metallic device. It was a data storage device, a thumb drive. He looked up at the gaping hole in the ceiling, a sense of unease washing over him. This wasn't random, this was deliberate. But why now? And why him? Someone on board has a secret, but what is it? Clutching the thumb drive in his hand, Elias felt a growing sense of foreboding. The turbulence continued to batter the plane, each jolt intensifying the fear in the cabin. He looked around, trying to assess the situation. Most passengers were huddled in their seats, eyes wide with terror, praying for the ordeal to end. Sergeant Major Huxtable remained stoic, his gaze fixed on some distant point, his jaw clenched tight. Elias knew he couldn't just sit and wait. He had to figure out what was going on. He glanced at the digital display screen on the seat in front of him. Usually it showed the flight path, estimated time of arrival, and other mundane information. But now, it was flickering erratically, displaying a jumble of distorted characters. He squinted, trying to decipher the strange symbols. At first, they seemed like random noise, a glitch in the system caused by the turbulence. But then, a pattern began to emerge. The characters shifted and rearranged themselves, forming distinct letters. Elias frowned. Divert. Divert where? The message changed again, the letters swirling before settling into a new word. TULSA. Tulsa. Why Tulsa? It didn't make sense. They were hours away from any major airport, and Tulsa was hardly on their direct route to Sacramento. He leaned closer, his heart pounding in his chest. The message flickered once more, the letters flashing urgently. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline. Someone was trying to communicate with him, sending a coded message through the plane's entertainment system. But who? And why? He looked around the cabin, searching for any sign of someone watching him. But everyone was too preoccupied with the turbulence to notice the strange messages. He tapped Sergeant Major Huxtable on the shoulder. Sergeant Major, take a look at this, he said, pointing to the flickering display. Huxtable squinted at the screen. What is that, Captain? I don't know, but it says we need to divert to Tulsa now. Huxtable's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. Divert? Why would we divert to Tulsa? I have no idea, Elias replied, but I don't think this is just turbulence. Something's not right. He showed Huxtable the thumb drive he had found in the ceiling. I found this. I think it's connected. Huxtable took the thumb drive, examining it closely. Where did you find this? It fell from a panel above my seat, Elias explained. I think someone is trying to tell us something. Huxtable nodded grimly. It looks like we're in the middle of something big, Captain. Something dangerous. Elias knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't rely on the flight crew to figure out what was going on. They were either unaware of the situation, or worse, complicit in it. He decided to trust his instincts and follow the instructions on the display. We need to get to the cockpit, Elias said. We need to find out what's happening. But how could they get to the cockpit with the turbulence raging and the crew seemingly oblivious? More questions than answers. Elias glanced around the cabin, his eyes locking briefly with Diane Rathmore's. She was standing near the galley, her face pale and drawn, hands clenched tightly at her sides. The earlier confrontation between them now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the growing unease that gripped the plane. He approached her cautiously. Diane, he said quietly, I need to know what's really going on. This isn't just turbulence. She swallowed hard, her eyes flickering with hesitation. You're right, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. It's worse than that. The plane's been hacked. Elias blinked, trying to process the words. Hacked? By who? Diane shook her head. I don't know their names, but they've taken control of the plane systems. Flight path, communications, even the autopilot. They're forcing us to divert to Tulsa. Why Tulsa? Elias asked, narrowing his eyes. They want something? Diane said, her voice trembling. A package in the cargo hold. It's important. Valuable, dangerous. Elias' mind raced. He had heard rumors about secret shipments on military flights, but nothing concrete. What kind of package? Diane hesitated. I don't know. I just know it's the reason behind all this. The hackers are willing to risk everyone on this plane to get it. A cold knot tightened in Elias' stomach. Do you have any idea who's behind this? She shook her head again. No. But whoever it is, they're organized and ruthless. They've disabled the cockpit security systems. The pilots are trapped, and the hijacker is armed. Elias felt a surge of anger. Why didn't you say anything sooner? I was scared. Diane confessed that I didn't know who to trust. And when you stood up for yourself earlier, I thought maybe you could help. Elias nodded slowly, appreciating her honesty. We need to get to the cockpit. We have to stop this before it's too late. Diane glanced nervously toward the front of the plane. I have the keycard that overrides the cockpit door lock. But if the hijacker sees us, we are dead. Elias' jaw tightened. We don't have a choice. Together, they began to move through the cabin, weaving between frightened passengers and overturned luggage. The plane still trembled with aftershocks from the turbulence, making every step precarious. As they neared the cockpit door, Elias' heart pounded. Voices echoed from inside, tense, urgent, and filled with fear. He pressed his ear to the door, straining to catch the words. We are approaching Tulsa. One voice said sharply. Prepare for landing. The runway isn't clear. Another protested. We can't land there. It's too dangerous. Those are not instructions, the first voice snapped. Follow the flight path. Elias' eyes narrowed. The hijacker was forcing the pilots to land in a place that wasn't safe. The stakes were higher than he thought. He turned to Diane now. She swiped the keycard, and the door clicked open. Elias stepped inside, ready for whatever awaited. But what they found inside was more terrifying than either of them could have imagined. The fight for control had only just begun. The cockpit was a cramped, tense space, humming with the low buzz of instruments and the heavy weight of fear. Elias stepped inside, his eyes immediately locking onto the three figures within. Two pilots sat rigidly in their seats, faces pale and sweat beading on their foreheads. Behind them stood a man, tall and imposing, a cold glint in his eyes as he held a pistol pressed firmly against the captain's temple. The man's voice was sharp and unforgiving. Who the hell are you? He barked, turning his gaze to Elias. I'm Captain Elias Grayson. Elias replied steadily, his military training keeping his voice calm despite the danger. And you're about to lose. The hijacker smirked, his grip tightening on the weapon. You think you can stop me? This plane is going down, and you're coming with it. Elias's eyes flicked to the pilots. They looked trapped, helpless. He knew he had to act fast. Let the pilots go, Elias said firmly. No one needs to get hurt. The hijacker laughed bitterly. No one's getting off this plane alive unless I say so. I'm in control now. Elias's mind raced. He needed a plan, and he needed it quickly. The plane lurched violently, throwing everyone off balance. The hijacker stumbled but kept his weapon trained on Elias. Seizing the moment, Elias lunged forward, knocking the gunman off balance. The pistol fired, the bullet whizzing dangerously close to Elias's ear. The sound echoed in the small cockpit, a stark reminder of the stakes. The two men grappled fiercely, fists flying in a desperate struggle for control. Elias felt a sharp pain in his ribs, but ignored it. His focus was singular: protect the pilots, regain control of the plane. The hijacker was strong, but Elias's training gave him an edge. With a final surge, Elias managed to wrest the gun away, sending it skidding across the floor. Pinned beneath Elias's weight, the hijacker hissed. You don't know what you're dealing with. I know enough, Elias growled. And I'm not letting anyone die today. The pilots, shaken but unharmed, looked at Elias with gratitude. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Brace for landing, he said, his tone steady despite the chaos. Elias took a deep breath and turned to the pilots. Can you fly this plane? The captain nodded, his hands trembling slightly. I think so, but the systems are compromised. Autopilot is unreliable. We're approaching Tulsa, the co-pilot added. The runway isn't clear. It's going to be rough. Elias's jaw clenched. Then we do it the old-fashioned way. Manually, the plane shuddered as it began its descent, the tension in the cockpit palpable. Elias could feel the weight of every life on board pressing down on him. The wheels hit the runway with a jarring impact. The plane skidded, tires screeching against the asphalt. Elias gripped the armrests, bracing for the worst. But the pilots managed to keep the plane steady, steering it safely to a stop just short of the runway's end. A wave of relief swept through the cabin. Passengers cheered, their fear replaced by gratitude. But Elias knew the danger wasn't over. Armed men were waiting on the ground, and the mysterious package still loomed over everything. What awaited them outside could change everything. The story was far from finished. The moment the plane shuddered to a halt, a tense silence descended. The passengers, still rattled from the harrowing landing, exchanged nervous glances. Elias, his body aching from the struggle in the cockpit, tried to gather his thoughts. The hijacker, subdued but defiant, lay bound on the floor. "Stay here," Elias instructed the pilots, his voice firm. "Keep the doors locked." He turned to Diane, who had followed him into the cockpit, her face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" She nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. "Did I think so?" "What now?" "Now," Elias said grimly, "we find out who's waiting for us outside." He cautiously opened the cockpit door and peered out into the cabin. The passengers were huddled in their seats, their faces pale with apprehension. Sergeant Major Huxtable rose from his seat, his eyes meeting Elias's. "What's the situation, Captain?" he asked, his voice low. "We've landed in Tulsa, but something's not right." Elias replied, "There are armed men surrounding the plane. I don't know who they are, but I don't trust them." Huxtable nodded grimly. "I'll go with you." Together, Elias and Huxtable made their way to the main cabin door, their sensors on high alert. As they approached the door, they could see a group of men in black uniforms standing on the tarmac, their faces obscured by masks. They carried high-powered rifles, their weapons pointed directly at the plane. Elias hesitated. "This could be a trap," he whispered to Huxtable. "We don't have a choice," Huxtable replied. "We need to find out what they want." Elias took a deep breath and opened the door. The armed men immediately surrounded them, their weapons raised. "Captain Elias Grayson?" a man in a black uniform asked, his voice cold and impersonal. "Who are you?" Elias demanded. "We are here to secure the package," the man replied. "Stand aside." "What package?" Elias asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play coy with me, Captain," the man snapped. "We know you have it. Hand it over and no one gets hurt." Elias' mind raced. They knew about the package, and they thought he had it. But who were these men? And what was so important about this package that they were willing to risk the lives of everyone on board? "I don't have your package," Elias said. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man in black stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You're lying. We know you were in contact with the hijackers. I was trying to save this plane," Elias retorted. "You should be thanking me." "We'll see about that," the man said, his voice dripping with menace. "Search the plane." The armed men stormed into the cabin, their weapons raised, shouting orders. The passengers screamed in terror as the men began to search for the mysterious package. Elias exchanged a worried glance with Huxtable. "This is getting out of control," he whispered. "We need to do something, but what could they do against so many armed men?" The odds were stacked against them, and time was running out. As the armed men in black uniforms swarmed through the plane, terrorizing the passengers in their search, Elias knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't let these individuals, whoever they were, seize the package without a fight. He subtly nodded towards Sergeant Major Huxtable, a silent agreement passing between them. "This is an outrage," Elias shouted, raising his voice to be heard above the chaos. "You have no right to terrorize these innocent people. Show me a warrant." The lead man in black, seemingly unfazed, turned to Elias with a dismissive smirk. "We don't need a warrant, Captain. We are operating under national security protocols." "That's convenient," Elias retorted. "But I'm a captain in the United States Army and I know my rights. You will not search this plane without proper authorization." The lead man sighed, as if dealing with a minor annoyance. "Fine. Have it your way." He gestured to one of his men, who produced a tablet and displayed a digital document. Satisfied, Elias glanced at the document, his eyes scanning the legalese. It appeared to be a legitimate warrant, authorizing a search of the aircraft for a hazardous material, posing a threat to national security. But Elias remained suspicious. Something about these men didn't feel right. Their tactics were too aggressive, their demeanor too cold. He suspected they were hiding something. "All right," Elias conceded. "You can search the plane, but you will treat these passengers with respect. Any unnecessary force, and you'll have me to answer to." The lead man nodded curtly, agreed. "Now, stay out of our way." As the search continued, Elias surreptitiously observed the men in black. They were methodical, but their focus seemed oddly specific. They bypassed luggage and personal belongings, concentrating their efforts on the cargo hold and the plane's electronic systems. It was clear they knew exactly what they were looking for. Meanwhile, Diane Rathmore stood to the side, her face pale and trembling. Elias approached her, his voice low. "Do you know who these guys are?" She shook her head, her eyes darting nervously. "I have no idea. They weren't part of the original plan." Original plan? Elias pressed, "What do you mean?" Diane hesitated, then blurted out, "The people who hacked the plane. They were supposed to be discreet. They were just going to reroute us to Tulsa, grab the package, and leave. And no one was supposed to get hurt." Elias's jaw tightened. "So you're telling me you helped orchestrate a hijacking?" "I didn't know it would come to this," Diane cried, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was doing the right thing. The package. It's dangerous. It shouldn't be in the wrong hands." "And you thought these hijackers were the right hands?" Elias asked incredulously. "No." Diane sobbed, "But I didn't know what else to do. I was desperate." Before Elias could respond, a shout rang out from the cargo hold. "We found it." The lead man in black rushed towards the cargo hold, his face grim. Elias followed close behind, his heart pounding in his chest. What was in that package that everyone was so desperate to obtain? The truth was about to be revealed, and it was more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The cargo hold door slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing a small, reinforced container nestled among crates and luggage. The lead agent in black stepped forward, his gloved hands carefully prying the container open. Inside lay a sleek, unassuming metal case, its surface cold and smooth. Elias felt a chill as he watched the scene unfold. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Passengers craned their necks, whispering anxiously, but the gravity of the moment silenced even the most restless. The lead agent carefully lifted the case and opened it. Inside was a calm, compact vial filled with a clear liquid, accompanied by a small device that looked like a remote control. "This," the agent announced grimly, "is a bioweapon. A virus engineered to spread rapidly and cause catastrophic damage." Gasps echoed through the cabin. Elias' mind reeled. "A virus? On this plane?" The stakes were higher than he had imagined. The agent continued. "This virus was being transported under strict military supervision, but it was stolen and someone on board attempted to hijack this flight to retrieve it." Elias' eyes narrowed. "Who stole it?" The agent's gaze flicked to Diane Rathmore, who stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't steal it,"